This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. Well, the 2016 American presidential election is over, with an ending that caught many people off guard and has occasioned a lot of worry about what the next 4 years may bring. This week, Emmet and John Robertson are back with a discussion of politics in comics, seen through the prism of Donald Trump's victory. Comics discussed include V for Vendetta, Transmetropolitan, the X-Men, and more. But first, you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. Okay, here come Emmet and John, and warning, political opinions will be expressed.
Hello everyone, my name is Emmet and I am on the line with John Robertson over in the States. How are things, John?
Oh, well, things kind of suck, Emmet, over here in the States. How are things over in New Zealand or Australia? Where are you? Where are you now?
It is confusing.
I keep forgetting whether it's one or the other. I know you were in one and are in the other. I don't remember what the order is, though.
I am living in Melbourne, Australia, and it was Wednesday this week for us. On Wednesday, I was walking through Melbourne, and people were visibly upset. People were on the streets talking about the election result in the States. And I think what's fascinating to me is that while this is a national election, it is an American election for the American president, all around the world, people are taking this on as something that has an immediate impact for them. And what this means for politics around the world, what this means, what this could embolden various groups around the world who figure, okay, now's the chance, because of all the different things Trump has alluded to in his speeches. So it's actually a pretty scary time, and a lot of people are quite worried about it. So that's why I thought it'd be a good idea for us to talk about how this has been reflected in comic books that we've read in the past, and maybe try and relate some of these recent events to things we've read in comic books. And I know we were going to talk about something completely different, but then after the election, I messaged you and I said, all right, let's talk about comic books that have some sort of political commentary in them, and let's just go through a few of those.
Well, cause there was something, before we get into the serious ones, now, yeah, it's pretty catastrophic over here. There's riots going on in Oakland tonight where I am. Not specifically where I am in Oakland. Oakland's kind of big, but in another part of Oakland, there's quite a lot. There's a lot of sirens and things, and I guess that's pretty much the case throughout the country right now. This is one of those moments in time which is a division point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the outbreak of World War I was.
Yep.
Beyond even really what 9/11 was, because this puts us in a position that is completely without precedent with a power of this scale. The only thing I could really liken it to is the fall of the Soviet Union, and one could say that Russia's interference in the election is revenge for that after all this time.
Yeah.
It could be argued.
Yeah. What's your point about mentioning these different historical points, these different flashpoints in history over the past 100 years? Strikes me as interesting because a lot of people have been comparing, a lot of Americans I've seen online have mentioned, I haven't been this upset since 9/11. I'm interested that you mentioned World War I. I'm interested that you mention the fall of the Soviet Union, because I think what has been interesting to me about this election is there seems to be a 10-year memory span for all the different things that have been discussed in relation to this election, whereas the pattern that we are seeing here is a pattern that has appeared before. The rise of a populist leader, the appeal to values which are somehow belonging to the past, which have been seen to have gone away, and that we're going to re-energize, we're going to bring back this pure state of affairs for a country. This appeal to nationalism. These are not new processes. These are not new phenomena in politics, but a lot of people seem to be experiencing them for the first time, and they seem to be only aware of it for the first time, which is frightening to me. That's frightening to me.
Well, there's a couple of things that's happening over here as an immediate effect. The first is that there have been, as I said more than once before this would happen, a bunch of people who basically feel that they have permission now to commit acts of private violence against people of color, lesbians, gays, trans. There's been at least 8 reports of trans teenager suicides because they were terrified by this.
God, yeah.
There's one death so far. There's been harassment. There's been some acts of serious violence, but there's been at least one death of a Saudi young man who was, I think, stomped to death, basically. There's that. And then there's the media, which is rushing to, because they had everything so wrong, they have basically completely submitted, put the O-collar on and blindfolded themselves.
Yeah.
And readied themselves for Trump. Because basically what they're doing now is saying you're supposed to have empathy for the white working man, and I expect country music to go back into vogue sometime in the next year. No, it's like I'm old enough to remember when Reagan came in, and that was a thing around then too.
Yeah.
You know, via Urban Cowboy, God help us, and then the thing is, there's this whole thing of like, black guy says, "Cop shot me and I'm dead."
Yeah.
Media says, "Why are black people angry?" White guy says, "I stubbed my toe." And the media says, "Oh my God, how can we help? We're so sorry for not noticing."
Yeah.
And they leap to that as quick as they can. They seem relieved that suddenly they are being pressured to talk about white people, so they don't have to bother with the Black Lives Matter thing anymore.
Yeah. This is
that they seem to be rushing to get to that, and these are the immediate psychological effects this is having over here.
Yeah. Now,
this
is why I wanted to talk about, like, we are contributing to the Deconstructing Comics podcast for Tim and Kumar, and very much we are almost like freelancers in this scheme where we sort of come together and have a conversation about comics and then submit it to them. But the reason why I thought this topic will be appropriate for a comic book podcast, and this is not a politics podcast, but a comic book podcast, is because historically comics have been the comics were founded out of underground cultures trying to communicate. It was a cheap medium for socialists in its earliest days to circulate notification with their communities, and a lot of comic book writers have been able to tell stories that riff on political ideas that wouldn't get a lot of hearing in mainstream media. So I felt as if that was something that we could discuss in relation to comics and maybe comic book series in the last 30, 40 years that were coming in the wake of 1960s and 70s underground comics and the political fallout from that. And then more recently, we are seeing a sort of trend back to left-leaning, radical-leaning comic book storytelling. So I thought between the two of us, we could probably nominate some books that have taken on these ideas and done them within a comic book context. So I asked you, to come up with at least 5 book titles that we could talk about in this, and I came up with 5. And I know that we respectively have some of the same titles on our lists. So I just wanted, just to get us started, what comic book series do you think is a good model for people looking to read something in these times, in this time of upheaval, in this time of protest? Is there a particular series that you would like to discuss?
In this one?
Yeah.
Well, this one right now, as far as I'm concerned, the most directly pertinent is the book version, which is quite fucking distinct. And I'm sorry, I get a little itchy on this particular subject, but is quite more pertinent than the movie of V for Vendetta.
Yes.
Because, it is quite directly relevant to all of this.
Yes.
Much more so than the film, because the film, I find, tries to be hopeful in a way I find inappropriate. It's too bright. It's too... Natalie Portman's presence is a problem, as far as I'm concerned, because she inherently makes the whole thing more hopeful and cheery than it should be, more glam. To be honest, I believe that the proper way to adapt that would have been in something more like a British series that possibly looks something like Touching Evil.
Yeah, I was just
like that.
Alan Moore and David Lloyd. This is a serialized book in Warrior magazine, I believe, back in the 80s, and it's being since collected by DC Vertigo. I recently reread it, and the sequence where Evie, who is the character Natalie Portman played in the movie, the sequence where Evie is detained and tortured and broken in what it turns out to be a simulation of a camp, is incredibly dark. It's incredibly grimy and gritty, and I know exactly what you mean. In a British procedural, you would have even that visual grit that Lloyd captured in his art, and in the film, as you say, that whole overcast day look that Lloyd gives the entire thing. The whole thing, just the very drawing itself has that washed out feeling. It feels like, to me, it feels so 1980s UK. It's so familiar to me from that time. Just looking at the art, to me, it is a wet Sunday in the middle of the 80s. It just feels like that. It feels like Thatcher's Britain. It feels like the sort of washed out colors of that time. And then, as you say, with the film, there was an Americanness to it, and there was an attempt to link the events of the film to Bush's presidency, which I felt was very superficial. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the film, but I do agree with you that it sort of had a gloss to it. It had an attempted universality to it, whereas V for Vendetta is a very British fascist story. It's a story about British fascism, and that's what it is.
Here's the thing. It actually does, the differences between the two do, in fact, I believe, highlight some key points about the use of politics in that and in comics. See, the movie is intended for a mass audience. The thinking is primarily American, regardless of whether it primarily has British actors in it. And so it's tailored toward that. Now, the thing is that where they try to link this into actually somewhat trutherish territory is the St. Mary's virus thing, which is what they use as the excuse to do all that. Now, in the book, it's a nuclear war, much more 80s, granted. But it's a nuclear war that caused the destabilization of everything and allowed for Norse fire to come in. Now, the thing is that in that particular case, they're taking advantage of the situation, whereas in the movie, they engineered the situation. The thing is that ends up taking over the plot. And the thing is that the movie seems to be making the point, it's not so much the horrible security society they've created and all the people they killed, which is not really gone into in the film as well as the book does.
Yeah, in the book it's genocide. They actually committed genocide.
It's absolute genocide. And then there's the scene. Then there's the whole sequence they left out with him taking acid at the camp.
Yeah, and he sees
all
the black people. Yes,
the people who died.
Yes, yes.
And that's the only time you ever see them.
Yep.
But they're there. And then the thing is, the only real examples you get in the movie are two gay characters. One, an off-screen character, Valerie, from the book, and that whole bit is pretty much, it's exactly from the book, and that's actually a pretty good sequence. Much like the Dr. Manhattan origin in Watchmen, which is one of the few things that's exactly right. There's also Stephen Fry, who replaces, I guess, Gordon was his name.
Yeah, he was the love interest. Yeah. Yeah,
replaces the love interest with a gay best friend character.
Yeah.
Who is also slightly based on Jonathan Ross.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he doesn't have a list. And the thing is that they're both performers, so it's actually even completely redundant. But the thing is that okay, you hear this, but you don't really get any other real examples. And the thing is, it's in a very American way to deal with politics in movies, which is instead of dealing with the fact that a group of people were killed, people can't think of the group and have any emotional connection to it. We have to. It's like Ronald Reagan. He couldn't relate to groups, but if a guy came into his office and said, "My family is starving," he'd write him a check.
Yep.
And his heart would absolutely sincerely bleed for him. That's how Americans are. And we personalize it through cuddly Stephen Fry, but we don't deal with the fact that mass amounts of people died. So basically, it's not so much that all this horrible things happened, it's that it was done with a lie. So if it had been done with a truthful reason, that would have been okay. That seems to be the point it's making. And it's problematic, which is not at all the point the book makes. The book is very harsh. The book is trying to warn people in a serious, serious way. I mean, I seem to recall that Alan Moore wrote some very paranoid things in the preface to the original collection.
He talks about how he thinks he'll have to move his family to America to get away from the rise of the National Front in the UK, and
after all this time, he's still sitting in the same spot in Northampton.
Still sitting in, yeah,
funny,
Northampton. There's something interesting as well about how Moore wrote the script for V in particular. V speaks in a very poetic way. V makes lots of allusions. He's continually referring to literature, poetry, pop songs. So everything he says, he's trying to represent all of this culture that's been repressed and has been shut down by the fascist junta. And one of the things that comes out of it for me is that when you've got the voice of fate and you've got the different aspects of the dictatorship, so you've got the mouth and the finger and the eye and the ear, they speak very directly. Their language is very prosaic. And Moore seems to be saying that the language of fascism is repetitive and plain and blank, whereas V, as the spirit of anarchism, who's standing against this, is all about romance and poetry and dreams, and hence all the references to the Faraway Tree novels by Enid Blyton and this idea of... which
are definitely not a thing in America.
Yeah.
I've never seen them.
Again, very British reference, but it's something I grew up on. I read all those books.
What kind of thing is it? I mean, what happens? I mean, in general, what happens to it?
The Faraway Tree novels are about a group of children who are transported to this magical realm. You have a sense that it's in the clouds, it's above us, and it's very dreamlike. And they have a series of adventures with magical creatures and giants and so on and so forth. They're beautifully written. It's very different from... Blyton also wrote a series of books called The Famous Five. They're the most well-known ones. And they're about a bunch of children having adventures in the English countryside. It's very, very popular. But I always liked The Faraway Tree, because The Faraway Tree was Enid Blyton's Narnia novels, if you like. So he's sort of appealing to that idea of imagination. But imagination isn't necessarily good. Imagination can also be quite destructive and quite violent. So V sort of encompasses all of that. And it's the side of British culture that's been repressed. So when it comes back in a very aggressive, very violent way. And hence V's campaign of terror, his explosions, his this is Alan Moore's idea of anarchism as a living thing that is not neat and tidy and has a definite end in mind. V's plan is all dependent on Evie becoming his successor and then maybe developing something that succeeds him, but we don't know. We don't have that story. We don't know what Evie actually achieves as V. We only see the destruction that V...
supposedly she's supposed to be a rebuilder, and God knows how that happens.
Well, yeah, he sort of he trusts that to her, but we don't know. And I actually really like that about it.
How would she know how? How would she know how? I mean, the thing is, it's like he shows her a lab where she can make psychedelic drugs or bombs, he says. How does she know how to do either?
I mean, like, this is the thing. He breaks everything down, and then the idea is, okay, you are now responsible. He's given the society a choice, and the choice can be the wrong choice, but it's a choice. Whereas authoritarianism takes the choice away from you. So that's this notion of, I think he says as well that, this isn't anarchism, this is chaos. Like, he's just the aspect of chaos. She will then, having gone through this process with him, potentially.
If I give you a car, okay, and you don't know, and you haven't got the slightest idea how to drive,
yes,
then I've just killed you.
Yes. Well, look,
possibly several other people.
This is why I see V for Vendetta as being a very romantic book, because there is this sense of freedom, and it may go very, very badly, but it may go very well. We don't know. But that's the absurdity of pure anarchism. It can be,
much as the absurdity of pure democracy, which is why I don't want them to get rid of the Electoral College. If we had direct vote, I can imagine much worse things happening.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you mention because we started talking about the film, and I know I saw you on Facebook last night. You tagged David Lloyd, and you were talking about the film with David Lloyd. I went to see Arrival the other night.
Making a lot of these same points. Yeah, yep. I was preparing for this.
I went to see Arrival the other night, the new Denis Villeneuve film, and in the film, the world descends into chaos when a series of alien spaceships suddenly appear at various points around the planet, and there are shots of riots all around the world, and there's a brief shot of rioters with the V mask on. And I was like, oh, there we go. It sort of transcended the text in this very interesting way.
Wait, hold on. What year did Independence Day come out?
Independence Day came out in, I want to say, 96?
Then that precedes it being used in actual protest, because it also precedes it, I believe, being a movie, which is what touched that off in the first place, not the book. So that means that was the filmmakers making a reference. I mean,
there's no reference. Sorry, John. There's no reference to V for Vendetta in Independence Day.
Yeah, I thought you said that somebody in the crowd had a V mask on. In
Arrival, which is a new movie which has just come out.
Oh, okay. That's nothing. That's no different than them using it in South Park like they did recently.
I know, but I'm saying it now. It is the reason that you have that shot in the movie is it communicates to the audience immediately that the V mask represents rebellion. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
So the point I'm making is that the V mask and V for Vendetta has, as V argued, become an idea, and now it's something that you can see. It's immediately communicable to just random audiences who've never even read the comic book. They know what the V-Mask is. And there's something quite beautiful about that, and there's something quite terrible about that, because, again, it's synonymous with chaos and destruction and et cetera, but also it is something we all recognize. And I think there's something really interesting about V as a concept continuing, even though the book was written for Warrior magazine 30-something years ago. I just thought the other thing, another book I wanted us to talk about quickly was a recent book that also came out through DC during their brief DCU phase, which is Prez, and that's written by Mark Russell and Ben Caldwell did the art with Mark Morales on inks and Jeremy Lawson on colors. And I list all the creators because it's a very beautiful looking book. It's a great package. V appears in Prez as well. The V mask is worn by a group of hackers in one panel, and there's a bunch of them sitting around a computer spreading misinformation about the American election for the president, and they're all wearing V masks. So again, it sort of just keeps going. It keeps going through all these different comic book series.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read?
I've seen like a few issues of it. I don't think I really continued very much with it. I'm very familiar with the original.
Yeah.
And also what Neil Gaiman and Ed Brubaker did with it. Actually, I remember. I have to say, by the way, when that came out, Smells Like Teen President. The thing is, it was a total attempt to glom onto a wave. Absolutely. I liked it. It was a very, very Generation X book. It was a good one, I thought. But I also just was very fond of that particular era of Vertigo. The Prez concept is a weird one because basically the thread that seems to go is one of absurd idealism versus corruption. Is basically the theme that it generally pursues. Yeah. Also, because Joe Simon, he was great at coming up with the launching place, but he was like terrible at keeping going. And so, like the original, it's like it starts off with this strong idea. This guy who makes a name for himself by making all the clocks actually accurate in his town. That's the thing he does, and that's what makes him president. And then there's this boss Smiley guy who's just like this complete embodiment of Nixonian corruption. Yeah. Who wants to destroy him. Who under Gaiman becomes a kind of god. But in the book is, I guess, much more realistically just a man with an enormous, scary, fleshy smiley face. But it's like, so that works for like one episode or two. And then after that, we basically have things like they're invaded by Transylvania, for instance, or just stupid shit like that. I think it lasted to 6 issues. I think
just a year. 1973, 1974, wasn't it?
Yeah, weird experimental time with DC around then. Lots of really good covers.
Yeah.
And then of course there's just the problematic character of Eagle Free, who I'm sure Simon meant respectfully, but I mean he's an Indian a modern day Indian who lives in the wild, but in the eastern part of the country. Yeah. He walks around with no shirt and a feather in his head, and this is at a time when the American Indian movement was going on, and I'm sitting there going, Jesus fucking Christ, this is like almost as bad as Ebony White.
Well, it's interesting you raise that, because the new Prez book, also has a character who has been roundly criticized online and in Twitter and so on, which is it's a drone/battle robot who has an existential crisis and becomes self-aware, and then comes out, in effect, attends LGBTQI meetings, starts identifying as female, and by the end of the 6 issues, I think it was 6 issues, has approached Beth Ross, who's now the President of the United States, and offered her services as a fully functioning bodyguard. So that's where we leave that character. But people took the character as a insult to LGBTI identity politics and identity issues, and I find that fascinating because I didn't think it was intended as an insult. I thought it was an attempt to engage and at the same time I'm trying to be careful here. Attempt to be humorous in some of the situations it found itself in, and then she found herself in afterwards, but not mock those movements, not mock those issues around identity, but simply parlay them into the experience of being a robot achieving consciousness. So it was fascinating that even I think that was a deliberate parallel but one that was attempted to be a little more informed, maybe a little more ironic. So that thread is still in the series, but I don't think people took it the right way, and call-out culture sort of came around in force to attack the book. And what's amazing about what Russell has written in this character of Beth Ross is she's not an idealist in the way that the original character was. She is a victim of viral fame. She's known as Corn Dog Girl because she got her hair caught in a corn dogger. And someone released the video. The video went viral. She becomes famous because everyone votes in elections via Twitter to encourage voter turnout. She actually becomes the president. And that thread of her being an accidental presidential candidate means that she's not an idealist as such, but she is thrust into the situation and goes, all right, how can I make this work? And so there's a sort of pragmatism to it. And that's
kind of like Ruin and Flagg, actually.
Yeah, and it's there's a bit of Ex Machina in there as well, because in Ex Machina, Mayor 100, he keeps saying, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm a realist. So this is notion of this situation, this American system, political system, is inherently ridiculous. We need somebody, an outsider, to come in and actually shake it up. And of course, that is the narrative that's informed this very election that we've just had the result for. All these books, I think, are sort of touching on that theme, that idea of what would an outsider do. In Prez, the outsider is Beth Ross, and she's a benevolent figure. But in Trump, we have somebody who's not benevolent at all. And I found rereading Prez to be a somewhat haunting experience. All of the issues that are being raised in the series, I'm going, oh dear, this is all a little too close to home for me.
It almost seems like we should have Kumar here, though, because the thing is that what's actually the most directly relevant to what just happened, now that I think about it, is Lex Luthor as president. And I didn't read any of that.
Yeah, I remember the coverage of that. That was when Bush was going for election.
There's a couple of things about that. Now,
Yeah.
When John Byrne reformulated Lex Luthor, a big, huge part of the inspiration there was Donald Trump.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, we forget just how long he's been a figure in popular culture that almost everyone commented on at some point or another.
Trudeau has just released 30 years of Trump cartoons in Doonesbury. And he was interviewed there recently at NPR, and he was saying, Fresh Air on NPR, he was saying that he assumed back in the 80s Trump was running for election. He assumed that that's what he was doing, because he was being so present. He was suddenly everywhere. And he has Trump say, if I run for president, you're forced to give me free press. If you give me free press, I will use that free press to increase my business. And I was going, oh my God, that was written in the 1980s.
We've known who he was for a very long time. But the thing is that, yeah, the thing is that Lex Luthor, as he was in the DC universe up until, I guess, Final Crisis or whatever, I don't know what he's like right now, but that Lex was basically at least half Donald Trump. And he did become president. And it's like, how did was he actually elected? I never read that storyline. I'm just aware of it.
He was a president. Yes, he was president. And he was president during the Our Worlds at War event, which then had, I think it was Jeff Loeb's major DC comic crossover. And then that had the unfortunate coincidence of coming to a conclusion around the time of 9/11. So then you had scenes where Superman is refusing President Lex Luthor's command to help reconstruct cities. He's saying, no, humanity should have the dignity of their own labor. And then American construction workers are going, yay, Superman, thanks for not helping us rebuild all of this destruction in the city. It was incredibly it was like a minefield politically, because you can see what they're trying to say.
That's very strange.
You can see what they're trying to. They're trying to say this is a time for us to rebuild. This is a time for us to try and come together as a society. But in the DC fictional universe, you have a superhuman. You have many superhumans, but you have this one particular superhuman who can actually do all of this very quickly. And President Lex Luthor is saying, "Can you do this?" And Superman's
Can you please save America a great deal of money, time, and trauma?
Yeah. But he's
we got enough work to do as it is.
Yeah, it was so strange, and again at the same time, we were talking about comics responding to political crises or particular events. This is also the time when J. Michael Straczynski did the Doctor Doom letting loose a tear because of the destruction of the two towers. You have that weird mixture of sentimentality and complete political tone deafness that comes about in mainstream comics, whereas the comic books that are angry, that are protesting, tend to get to the nub of it a little bit better. The ones that are trying to reflect political events but try and gloss over them a bit, they read so poorly.
Well, here's one to compare, actually, that actually touches on both those things you just mentioned. Okay, now, one of the most fondly remembered X-Men, I guess graphic novels, but stories in any event. But, the X-Men is often taken as an allegory for oppression, both oppression of various minority groups, and also of the special qualities that those minority groups have that if we only see and accept them. Both fair enough, but the thing is it does tend to trivialize it a bit.
Yes.
Because God Loves, Man Kills is the one I'm thinking of. And the thing is that I know that's a big one to go after because it is very well respected. And I remember liking it myself. And God knows I do love the Brett Anderson art and the Steve Olaf colors. They still both look awesome.
Yep.
Steve Olaf with using blue, always a beautiful thing. So there's a couple of things in particular. Now, see, that's where they really try to make this allegory very, very fucking heavy-handedly explicit.
It opens with a lynching. Magneto interrupts a lynching.
It opens of a couple of black kids.
Yeah.
And they are lynched. And you're supposed to assume that this is because they're black, and then we find out no, it was because they were mutants. And it's like immediately, suddenly the metaphor takes over from the reality. It is, and you're meant to feel more sympathetic. And this is only underlined by fucking Kitty Pryde, who has this strange habit that happened more than once. And maybe it's because she's, a girl from Deerfield, which is an affluent suburb of Chicago. Well, Deerfield people are a little interesting about racism. Right. So I guess it's realistic. But the thing is that Kitty has this real thing whenever she's challenged about mutants being oppressed or whatever, of bringing up the N-word.
Yeah.
She does this often. And in that particular one, it's like her what was she anyway? Her gym teacher or whatever, Stevie.
She was a dance instructor.
Dance instructor. That's it. Okay. So anyway, it's like someone says mutie, and she's miserable, and Stevie tries to comfort her by saying it's their only words, and then she says, "Well, what if he called me an N-word or you an N-word? How would you feel then?" Yeah. And then Stevie goes, "My God, she's right." It's like, no, she's not. You don't exist.
And again,
okay, so there's that. Okay, now let's compare that to probably the best writer of politics in comics in the whole UK, and that who really means it, who really, really fucking means it, and that is Pat fucking Mills.
Yes.
Oh my God! I mean, that man does it better than almost anybody in a lot of ways.
Can I just say, for the record, I could listen to Pat Mills talk 24 hours a day. I just love it because he seems indefatigable. He just keeps going. He's like a dynamo, you know. He's like, or he just keeps pursuing his passion. He keeps just spitting in her eyes, saying, "This is what's happening. Wake up! This is what's going on." And I love.
He's like the Al Jorgensen of comics. I swear to God, because
amazing.
It's like he's endlessly productive, he's endlessly coming up with all these different projects.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's not just his contributions as a creator; it's also as an editor. He created 2000 AD. He created basically Judge Dredd.
Well, no, that was John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra, but he was the editor on it. And then he made a lot of.
Yeah. He's basically he's like the to British comics what Brian Eno has been to popular music for the last 30 years.
There you go.
This constant presence that a catalyst that allows all the rest to basically go where it's going.
Oblique
woven into almost everything.
Oblique comic book strategy for the day. Be Pat Mills.
Yeah. So it's like the thing is now the political stuff was always in Judge Dredd, obviously, and I don't really know what action was like. I've only had a chance to read one, and I only really saw a Hookjaw story. Which, granted, the premise of that Jaws from the point of view of the shark is really kind of a great idea. An early PETA kind of story, really. But in the 80s. You know, he was doing with Igor Goldkind, Crisis, and Crisis was pretty fucking amazing. But between that, he did Nemesis the Warlock.
Yeah.
Nemesis the Warlock quite explicitly dealt with with both the subjects of racism and xenophobia, and anti-immigrant feeling.
Yep.
In this case, it was alien.
Yep.
And you got no sense that there was an actual invasion or aggressive action at any point by aliens, and that humans had won, and this is the price that the aliens were paying. It's just that they were aggressively racist toward aliens, or species, I guess. And not just when they came into Earth, but actually going off-world to annihilate them.
Yeah.
Am I wrong about that? Am I remembering that wrong?
No, you are correct. I kind of feel it was the left-wing take on... He actually... Pat Mills is the left-wing Heinlein. Because in Heinlein Starship Troopers, the book opens with our hero, Johnny Rico, murdering a building full of aliens, and we're supposed to cheer him on. I remember reading that going, what is happening? But it really is a litmus test for your political sympathies when you're reading that book, because the whole reason they're killed is because they're aliens. Whereas in Mills's story, we are shown this sort of lure of authoritarian fascism, and then it is meant to be something that's abhorrent. But at the same time, we ride along with Torquemada, isn't it? Is Torquemada the character?
Torquemada is the villain.
Yeah.
Who is killed, and then he's sort of a ghost, and then he's you know what he's like? He's like Arcane. He's like this ghost, but a malicious one that can do things to you, and then he inhabits bodies and he burns them out very quickly, I think.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the world that is created by, you know, killing all the aliens, this pure society, doesn't really look very pleasant. I mean, it makes Mega City 1 look appealing.
Yeah. And we've Kevin O'Neill to thank for that as well, because, you know, Kevin O'Neill with Nemesis and with martial law, you know, you've got that hyper detailed, hyper dense paneling that he has going on, and just oppressive sense of ugliness, but also it's very kinetic as well. There's a lot of stuff happening on the panel.
Oh yeah, I mean it's all that. It's just I would never want to live in a world that Kevin O'Neill drew, because you know everything's so sharp.
Yeah.
I mean it's like I get the feeling that if I even sat down anywhere in his world, I'd either cut myself or something would splooge all over me.
Yeah.
I don't know which, and I don't want that to happen. You know, everything's alive, but no. The thing is that Now, I guess what I'm wondering is, how does that compare as allegories go? I remember my particular favorite Nemesis story is a story in which he ends up marooned in some village or something, some kind of countryside place with a bunch of country bumpkins, and I think they hang him, or they think they hang him anyway. And in fact, his neck doesn't work that way, so that's not actually what happens. But he's got these magical, witchy kind of powers.
Yep.
And slowly, all the people who hanged him have horrible things happen to them, except for one who frees him, who's, I think, Nose Drip, I think his name was, because he's got a big nose and it drips a lot. It's clever. And basically the whole idea is there's no idea presented as it is in X-Men, this Martin Luther King of tolerance, please accept us. It's more like, you're fucking with me and I'm going to fucking kill you. It's very much like V, only even purer.
Yeah.
It's thematically, because Nemesis is fighting for freedom, but essentially that amounts to an awful lot of destruction and death. It's war. It's war between species. So I guess, I don't know. I mean, do you think that there, however, is something problematic about presenting that allegory as something that is something that you are going to think of as other?
I think
an alien.
Yeah, I think the issue.
It's such an inhuman alien as Nemesis. I mean, he's basically got a head like some kind of weird horse.
Yeah.
With a point on it.
I think if you look into the notion of othering, I mean, that can be a useful allegory for the reader. I think the problem with X-Men, as you raised before, is when they lose sight of the allegory and then it becomes entirely self-contained within the universe. So in the Marvel universe, being a mutant, is the worst possible social status, and it exists in a context which we are led to believe has no real referent in our world, because you can be gay and you can be black and you can be Muslim and you can be whatever, but at least you're not a mutant, and that can distort the allegory. I mean, I personally think every single superhero comic on some fundamental level is political, because every superhero comic is all about a character deciding, I know what is right for my society. I am not going to operate within the law of my society. I subscribe to a higher law, a natural law. And a lot of writers, a lot of British writers in particular, have looked at that formula and gone, fascism. And that's the story.
I actually would tend to agree with that, because the thing is, comics have been a vehicle for politics for their entire existence.
Yes.
And quite often, especially with newspaper comics, that was reactionary politics. One thinks of Harold Gray, or the later iterations of Al Cap.
Yep.
As he got older and got more cynical, because he started out as a New Dealer, but a skeptical one, but in a 40s kind of way, that sort of brassy kind of way. But then later he became more Nixonian as he became embittered with time and hated the hippies. Harold Gray was basically, when you're reading Harold Gray, you're essentially reading proto-Ayn Rand. Sometimes when I look at Harold Gray, I think Ayn Rand must have been reading this, because it shows up. I mean, this very point of view shows up in her work. Sometimes put exactly this way, and people do speechify in much the same kind of fucking didactic way.
Yeah.
But there's also a current. Some of the earliest graphic novels are left-wing tracts, like the stuff by Lynd Ward, the woodcut novels, as they called them. They're usually silent, and that's because they were designed in such a way as working men who spoke all kinds of languages could still understand them, which shows the particular power of comics, which it shares, I think, with things like political posters. I think that is actually message quickly.
That's what lies behind the vilifying of comics as something that perverts young people, because if they made it all about comics are designed to distort the morals of children, then you suppress comics because everyone wants to protect children, and that way you actually prevent any sort of circulation of information through comics to adults that might actually be communicating ideas they can't find in other media, and that actually address them directly.
It's like EC wasn't just having gucky horror comics. They were also doing a lot of comics that either explicitly or implicitly presented a point of view that was very much at odds with the kind of point of view that America felt you should have. And America was, and probably still is, very much just as totalitarian a society, psychologically and media-wise, as the Soviet Union. The difference is A, the overtness of the oppression of suppression, B, the degree of complicity which goes up and down between the corporate world and the government world, but also C, in the filtering of information and point of view. EC, when it had things like shock suspense stories, which granted had a lot of commonality with the kind of things that Elia Kazan was doing later on, but that was the late 50s, and that was long after that had happened, and comics were no longer considered anything worth taking seriously. They weren't at all, but the thing is that it's the general, it's not either in an overtly humorous way or in like in Mad, or in a much more, meant to disturb you kind of way, like Shock Suspense Stories, which is a fucking great book. It was, in essence, basically telling you need to think about things. Things are not what you think they are.
Yeah. And going back to that point of allegory, when I started doing some reading for this discussion, I did a search for political comics, and I stumbled across half a dozen recent French comic book albums mocking and ridiculing Sarkozy, Hollande and his mistresses, current political figures, and absolutely popular books. Not a problem. They're not underground. They're not. These are mainstream French bande dessinée. Can you imagine that a American comic book coming out currently that would be as aggressive, or as not aggressive, maybe that's not right, as ridiculing of either Obama or Trump in the fashion that the French can be? And I think there's a tradition there of ridicule, and there's a tradition there of laughing at power, which is suppressed in other cultures. And I find that really interesting, and I find that, I think, speaks to why the X-Men can't really be about race or gender, or it has to be about this fictional category of mutant. And it's why DC can't really get stuck into what it means to address LGBTQI issues in their comics, because they don't want to upset certain vendors, they don't want to upset certain retail chains. They can't have Batwoman get married. These are the reasons why that tradition doesn't exist. There's a fear of loss, and there's a fear of it comes down to sales. They don't want to lose money on these properties, so they're trying to be safe. Whereas in France, you've got this sense of the comic book as an established cultural work. So therefore, there isn't that same corporate commercial pressure to not be dangerous, to be safe.
Well, they do. It's not like however, it's not like they don't have characters that are licensable, like Tintin, certainly. And Tintin certainly delved into.
Tintin is a fascist.
Reactionary politics, actually.
Tintin is an absolute fascist little shitbag. We know this for a fact.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like Tintin and Babar. Both are interesting artifacts of France and Belgium's imperialist period.
Yeah.
And when you actually understand what was going on between Belgium and the Congo at the time, Babar becomes even more terrifying.
Yeah.
Coming up, the X-Men and the LGBT discussion, Kyle Baker's Nat Turner, Congressman John Lewis's March, the implicit message in stories of superhero vigilantism, Transmetropolitan, Bitch Planet, and more. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls, and want to help us move up to bigger and better things, how about donating a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. If everyone listening gave just $3 a month, it would make a big difference. We'd be able to reach several of our Patreon goals and bring you more content, including bringing back over 120 early episodes that have long been missing from our website. Check out all our goals and rewards and make your pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics.
Hi, my name is Billy Hogan, host of the Superman Fan Podcast, which explores the world of Superman and the many creators who have added to his legacy over the decades. Episodes will feature creator biographies or highlight some of their top stories they have created as well as their top characters. Other episodes will feature topics appropriate to the holiday or the time of the year. For instance, Valentine's Day will feature stories about the women in Superman's life. April Fool's Day will feature some of the bizarre Superman Silver Age stories or some of the imaginary stories that have been published. Halloween will feature some of the scary Superman stories or some of his strange transformations, and of course, some of the Christmas Superman stories. The website can be found at supermanfanpodcast.mypodcast.com. The blog is supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, and you can send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. I also have a spoiler-free comic book review blog of the titles I read every week, which can be found at mypulllist.blogspot.com, and you can send email about this blog to mypulllist@gmail.com.
The thing is, going back to the goddamn X-Men, the thing about it is it reminds me of, using vampires as an allegory for gay people. At least not necessarily that Anne Rice necessarily meant it that way, just that people certainly took it that way and it became a thing. And eventually, I guess she accepted it herself and it incorporated, but it wasn't really the main thrust at first. It's just that she's a girl and girls like talking about boys kissing. It's just a thing. I know I've gone out with female writers; they love writing that. But the thing is, you're presenting this minority group that from your point of view is misunderstood and reviled for bad reasons, and you want to make people empathize with them in some way here. So you make them, in the case of superheroes, something that saves people, something that stands for something, but they're different, so you have to accept it because they stand for something, or they're unique, or they create something beautiful, or whatever, something like that. In other words, it's an echo of the old integrationist viewpoint that was presented by something like Sidney Poitier, where, well, you're prejudiced against black people, but look at this one, as though the other ones aren't good enough. You have to be Sidney fucking Poitier. They have to be perfect, which is bad, which is a poisonous way to present it to begin with, because obviously nobody's fucking Sidney Poitier, okay? Nobody. And it's like that's not the point. It's not their achievement, despite what they are. It's like what they are doesn't matter. But the other thing is X-Men and the vampire thing. The X-Men are weapons of mass destruction.
Yes.
That look like supermodels.
Yes.
And they are actually dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They are actually things that are dangerous. Many of them can't control their powers.
Mm-hmm.
And no, that's not the same thing at all. That's the reason people are scared of them. That's the thing that is always missed when people are talking about this category. But the reason that people are scared of them is not because they're different. It's because their being different makes them actually a legitimate threat.
But there's something about
for
that.
all you have reason to know.
There is something about that could be applied in a very interesting way to allegorical readings, such as each individual X-Man is a ticking time bomb of some sort of societal change, some sort of group that is previously been unrecognized within our culture, and they are mutants in that they are changing how people are, and they could then change society, but that change may not come peacefully. That may be a very destructive change. We're back to V again. And if you read it that way...
Well, actually, if I might dig a bit on that point.
Yep.
Okay, so you're saying then that it even goes to the point where individual X-Men represent individual oppressed groups.
I'm saying that
I'm
saying that they represent types of individuality which we do not recognize, and I think.
Okay, like name two examples, just so I understand the distinction you're making.
Well, I mean, I would compare it to what's currently happening particularly in the online space with. All right. We have a situation now where people are saying, I'm sorry, your categorization of me as an individual is not valid because I have terms and I have an understanding of who I am as an individual that your language doesn't even approach. And hence you've got the whole trans cisgender divide. And then you have agender, non-binary, the difference pronouns. And you've got people who literally will just throw up their hands and go, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't even know what that is. Okay, don't just get away from me. And part of that is, like, don't trouble me to learn new terms. And part of what that is that the person is saying, well, this is my experience of my sexuality, my gender, my identity in this world, and this is what I am. But I am also not here to instruct you in how to relate to. I am simply asserting who I am. And if you were to look at some of the X-Men characters as representing that deeply individualized sense of self, I think there's a parallel that could be drawn there. And what I find very interesting is during the week I was listening to Jane Miles explain the X-Men. That's just kind of why the X-Men has been on my mind lately. And Jay has transitioned, and he was reading out an email that had been sent into the show where during the show they will point out aspects of Claremont's run, ideas and concepts of Claremont's run, and say, oh, that's queer. This is a very queer character, this is a very queer situation. And the person writing into the show said, I find that very offensive. Queer has been used as a word to make me feel bad. Please stop using the word queer. I'm gay. And Jay replied, queer is the word that describes my experience, because Jay would not be so easily slotted into LGBT as such. Queer is that sort of other category within that broad spectrum. Queer is my word. If you take away my word, you are forcing me into a category that I don't subscribe to. And I was listening to that and I was thinking, that's really interesting, because now we're at this space where we need to actually be very empathetic. We need to be very understanding and not expect people to fit into easily defined roles. We are living in an age where people are discarding the roles and going, no, this is my experience. And I feel as if X-Men was originally just a cheap and easy way for Stan Lee to come up with superpower characters, but because of the community...
absolutely. No, that's totally what it was.
That is what it was.
It's like, fuck it, they're born with them. That's it. They're just born with them.
Very appropriately, it has evolved, and the audience that's come up with it, such as Jane Miles, are saying, well, this is how this speaks to me, and this is what this means to me, and this is how the metaphor... I have changed the metaphor to suit myself, and that can be reflected in the books. And I think that's brilliant. I think it's really exciting. But it's only something that could be happening now. It's only something that we could be seeing now, because we're having these discussions now. We were not having these discussions in the same way back in the day. I remember Peter David, when he did X Factor, he had this whole thing where strong guy in the middle, off-the-cuff moment, says, stop calling us muties. That's a slur. It's like the word you used to use for black people. African Americans used to call them Negroes or worse. That's his line. You call them Negroes or worse. The reporter says to him, okay, so what do you want to be called? And he says, we are genetically challenged, or GCs for short. And there's Peter David taking that this is 1992, I think. This is Peter David taking the notion of naming conventions and then applying it to political correctness. And it can also be that. But it also is what it is today for a lot of people, where they're saying, no, this is queer, or this is all about being marginalized in a way that is not even recognized by society. My oppression is not even something that I'm allowed to feel, which I think was the point you were making earlier on about black protesters versus white protesters. There are legitimate forms of protest per the mainstream understanding of protest, and then there's illegitimate forms of protest, and they don't even have to be violent. They're simply, you shouldn't be acting up, in effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and then that actually rather neatly brings me to two things.
Yeah, go for it.
Because, okay, first of all, I happen to really like Kyle Baker.
Okay.
I have for a very, 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 very long time, all the way back to when he was doing The Shadow, which I still love that shit. The only time The Shadow was really that and Shaken was the only time The Shadow was at all interesting to me. To be honest, I couldn't give a shit otherwise. But when either of them are doing the character, it's awesome. And but he just recently discovered, apparently, the vehicle I use for the print versions of my comics, Create Space. He apparently discovered it, and through his Quality Jollity label, he has been just issuing just one after the other a whole bunch of stuff that he had that he could just immediately mock up for books, which it makes very easy to do, and I'm glad he's doing it. So he's just putting out all these little books, but at the same time, I also noticed that he finally finished Nat Turner, because I only ever got the first issue of that. Yeah. And I think there wasn't that much of it that was done in the serialized version, I thought. But judging for the preface, apparently he did finish it in some way and already self-published it at some point or another. This is Abrams.
I have a trade of it here in the house somewhere, yeah.
This is an amazing piece of work in so many different ways. It's very uniquely comics. The fact that it deals with, the narration being slightly unreliable compared to what you're seeing at times. The fact that it says that we can't even know if this is true or not at certain points. But at the same time, it has no problem showing you the perception in really searing terms in your eyes. It's very interesting. I don't know is it somewhere between history and historical fiction?
I've always seen Baker.
I don't want to go so far as to say fiction, but something that confuses me in particular about that is that he keeps using what he says is the Confessions of Nat Turner. Well, the Confessions of Nat Turner is a novel by William Styron. There is no written confessions in that sense. I don't think unless I'm completely mistaken about the history.
I did pick up another self-published indie comic, which was the Visions of Nat Turner, and there seems to be some indication that there might have been some document or some sort of reference to his life that people have, maybe Styron had based on that on. But, I mean, sorry, I don't mean to, let's not get bogged down in this, because I feel Baker is a very important voice in cartooning.
Oh, he's amazing.
Depictions of race and depictions of American culture. He's a fascinating creator.
Well, there was even something as mainstream as The Truth.
Yeah, which was like I remember it was like a bomb going off, because all of a sudden you had a character of Captain America who's explicitly about eugenics. Always has been. It's right there in the text. Explicitly about eugenics, and then Baker comes along and says, all right, well, I'm going to apply this to the Tuskegee experiment and just see where that goes. And it's a brilliant work, but I remember the fan forums, I remember the fan press, people were saying, oh, this is racist, this is anti-white, etc., etc. We didn't have the term social justice warrior.
That much of a tumult? I didn't notice that.
It was big at the time.
I honestly didn't notice that.
That was early 2000s. But we didn't have the term social justice warrior then. We do now, unfortunately. And I'm sure they would have been dropping that on him back then. But yeah, it was a hugely controversial series at the time.
the thing is that what was most genius about that connection that he made in that was that he was basically bringing explicitly out into the open the reference point that was being papered over by Captain America's origin. Because the thing is that the only reference point to something in real life, as far as what happened to Steve Rogers, were generally horrific things in real life. Horrible medical experiments done on people who could not, often gave no consent. You know, you see things like, for instance, the footage of those guys of those troops who had to actually stand out in the open while a nuclear bomb went off and then walk into what was left afterward.
Yeah.
And they got faces full of dust that was irradiated, and then they were monitored via their medical care for years, basically as an experiment to see what happened.
Yep.
Same with the people who were told to sunbathe amid fallout after the Castle Bravo shot. Things like that. And then, of course, the innumerable experiences, like the Tuskegee experiment, or experiments that were done on convicts, which was actually Luke Cage's origin.
Yep.
And that also brings us to the other interesting Marvel political thing, which is that period when it was just so Cold War, it hurt, which is hilarious to read a lot of it now. You know, every other villain is basically a commie.
Yep.
And often desperate to escape to the West. Oh, if only I could, says the little gargoyle, I think he was, the little dwarf guy who looks like Khrushchev. But it's interesting, and all of their early characters, how did they get their powers?
Radiation.
Radiation is your friend.
Yeah.
Radiation is your friend. It will make you great. That way you don't feel so bad about the bomb. And this is part of a general propaganda effort, again, to a totalitarian society, but a soft one.
Yeah, I mean, in the real world, they dropped the bomb off the Bikini Atoll, and all the people were basically left there to deal with the radiation fallout and the effect on their children and the effect on their community. People were experiencing horrible illnesses as a result of the testing of the atomic weapon off Bikini Atoll. In the X-Men comics, it mutates an island into a giant monster and kidnaps the X-Men. And then they defeat it, and it's fine. Like that again, the taking real life.
I mean, really,
issues. Yeah,
really.
Yes.
And that part that you mentioned right there, that wasn't even like Kennedy era high Cold War stuff.
No, that's 1970s.
That was
that's
the
Cochran.
70s.
Yeah, Cochran and Claremont.
I mean, my God.
Sorry, it's not Cochran. I'm wrong. It's Cochran and Len Wein.
Cochran.
It's Cochran and Len Wein.
And Dave Cochran.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was. It was, but yeah, Len Wein, who seems to, actually in some ways is the Brian Eno of comics, come to think of it. He seems to have created every other major property they've been making money off of for the past 40 years.
Yes, and he really wants you to know that. I saw him in Sydney a few years ago.
Weird.
I saw him in Sydney a few years ago. He came out on stage with Grant Morrison and Dave McKean, and he was wearing a Swamp Thing T-shirt. And I was like, all right, Len.
Of course he was.
I know what you're doing. I can see what you're doing. Fair enough.
Well, he deserves it. I mean, I think Karen Berger deserves it more, but he deserves it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. But the other one I was reading was March. Have you read this?
I haven't. I was trying to queue up an interview with him, actually, because I had a friend who was going to be...
Really?
Yeah, I had a friend who's going to be in the States.
John Lewis. You're trying to interview John Lewis.
No, this was a year ago. My wife and I, Steve Yarkun and I, we were in touch with John Lewis's office, and we had a friend who was traveling from Australia to the States to do, I think it was SFX. I'm not sure. And Lewis was going to be there launching the first book of March, and we tried to tie up a interview, and it didn't come to pass. But like I was really excited to do that. That was something I really wanted to do. Someday, yes, maybe yes, might do it, yes.
March is a good comic.
Mm.
I mean, before it's anything else, it is a really good comic. It is not didactic. It doesn't try to hit you over the head with anything. It's just good drama, beautifully drawn. I love just this nice. I hate to it sounds like a cliche, but it's a flowing style. You know, every page just sort of, it reads very quickly. And comics should ideally read quickly if you can make them do that. That's one of the reasons manga, I suppose, were successful. I mean, that's basically the way they work, right? They're meant to be read quickly on subways. It was basically the idea of why they're structured the way they are. But I'm not a manga fan, so I don't know. But I seem to recall that that's the thing. But it's just, I don't know. I mean, I haven't really seen a whole lot of things like it, except maybe, oh God, what is his fucking name? James Sturm. Some of James Sturm's stuff.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Bit of.
Interesting. Yeah.
What's that one that takes place in the mine far below? It was printed like it's a chapbook. So here it is. Above and below, 2 stories of the American frontier.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, it kind of reminded me of that. And the thing is, what I liked about it also was it wasn't your generic graphic novel, McCloud fiction style. Which I'm glad to see that influence seems to be fading out to some degree. I don't know, you just see all these indifferently drawn graphic novels that they just have this sort of style that's either manga derived or just sort of blank. And a lot of these kinds of things can often be that way. And this is something that's actually meant in an impassioned way artistically, as well as a historical record. And that's, it has, and that's the thing is there are some that aren't that way, and as a result, the message they're trying to get across is ineffective, whereas it goes right through. The same way that Larry Gonick is very good at getting you to remember history by tying it into humor.
Yeah.
What would you say are some comics that would be kind of, I don't know, propagandistic? I mean, just regular comics that people read, not ones that actually are overtly propaganda.
Interesting. I would accept that superhero comics that have vigilantes working for the status quo are inherently propagandistic in a way, because they are purporting to the reader the notion that violence can resolve issues that are fundamentally about societal change and societal malaise, but they can be solved by punching the problem in the face. And I think that is increasingly what happened to the work of Frank Miller, but I don't blame Miller for that. I think Miller is almost like a weather vane. I mean, he seems to be sort of picking up on the general trend of vigilantism in comics. So, but they sort of, if you look at the Punisher as an example of that, the Punisher outside of Garth Ennis and some of the more recent writers. I mean, the Punisher for me when I was in the 80s was somebody who just went around shooting drug dealers in the face. But they weren't, these were kids on the corner selling smack. These weren't the folks who were actually buying it in bulk for their high-rise luxury apartment parties with friends. These were kids on the street, and that was criminalizing. Well, it wasn't criminalizing. It was demonizing a black market on the street and saying the problem is there. And of course, that has racist overtones, that has classist overtones, and I think superheroes can slip into that very, very easily. And Punisher, Miller, some of Mike Barron's stuff as well. He tends to have this sort of knee-jerk, reactionary view of what justice is, and that's the danger. That's where you need that sense of history. That's where you need that sense of what does this mean for the reader, because otherwise you just have this sense that if you put on a suit and go out in the street and assault people, you will make the world better again. And that is why a lot of people are crying, quite worried about these incidents that we're hearing reported of would-be Trump supporters attacking people in the street, because they have the logic in their head that if they attack the Muslim, if they attack the gay person, if they attack whoever, that person will then go away. And that is actually the solution. And I feel that in some ways superheroes and I think action movies as well have parlayed that for a good... It would be interesting to compare with the period of the Cold War, but I would say the last 30, 40 years, you have that notion of violence will solve major social problems. Violence is the key. And of course that is fascistic. I mean, and that has been...
Well, even deeper than that.
Yep.
The thing is, violence is a means, a technique by which that is achieved. However, what underpins it, and is also and very much fascistic, is the emphasis on, as the solution to problems, will versus rationality. Or will versus compromise, if you prefer. Basically, it's that, I guess it's like the idea is that of Trump's appeal is that he'll just get this done. Fuck all this talk. Fuck all this debate. Fuck all these alternative viewpoints. We're just going to get to do this.
We don't need to listen to any experts. We don't need to have a debate. We're just going to take action, and it's going to make things happen.
I've seen. I have this DVD. This thing called Germany Awake. It was this collection of German propaganda clips from German propaganda films. Kind of that's entertainment for German propaganda. Without any particularly large dance sequences.
Is Liza Minnelli
in
there?
Well, I don't know. It depends on how you look at the margins. But one thing that I noticed is that there's a couple of them that have scenes in which they're basically mocking the pre-Nazi Weimar government, because you have this big parliament that can't agree on anything, and so nothing gets done. And well, that's a common theme here with this. And again, this perception that, well, they can actually do whatever they want because they have all of government now. And the thing is that for the last 10 or 15 years, a time when people have, been under greater security than they've ever known before, not in a way that makes them feel safe, just a way that makes them, basically have forgotten about the idea of privacy in a lot of ways. And that's had a deleterious psychological effect on people, on society. In that time, we've had the ultimate wish fulfillment machine, the superhero, become ascendant in popular culture and quite accepted, and often used as a metaphor in a way that more traditional things from film or literature would have been used, in fact, supplanting it to some degree. Our 80s adolescents taken over culture, basically.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, this to me speaks of an increasing amount of frustration. And the thing is, it isn't even allowed to be fully escapist because frustration is so great that it's even been building into the stuff itself. Some of the later DC and Marvel films, trying to take some pains to talk about the consequences of destruction, and becoming increasingly more dark and depressed. People say, "Oh, you're trying to bum everyone else." Well, yeah, but it also is a reflection of how people are actually feeling, I think.
Yeah. And, and art should actually challenge you on some level, even something like a popular spectacle like Marvel's Avengers. There should be some sort of critical aspect to it. Otherwise, why not just watch a series of explosions, which brings us to the work of Michael Bay. But you have this idea that it should just be pure entertainment. But and critique and actually trying to talk about what's going on in the world can be entertaining. It makes you think in a certain way. I think that's what's fascinating about the popularity of Black Mirror at the moment, because Black Mirror seems like show. What? It is trying to talk about things.
I love Black Mirror. It's just such a mind fuck. That's all.
Absolutely, but it's like, can you see how giddy people are?
I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, and viewers.
Yeah, I love it. It hurts me, but I love it.
Yes, and
it's hard to rewatch. It really is.
It's you need to be ready for it, but at the same time, there's just this sense of excitement that here is writing that actually is dealing with some of these issues, which we're all aware of, but we're still, in our popular entertainment, we're still recycling tropes and recycling villains from our 1980s childhoods, as you say. Even if we look at the Avengers, where they had the invasion, the Chitauri were just like the faceless enemy jet fighters in Top Gun. No personality, no sense of who they are, where they're from, because it's better if they're just villains. They're monsters. If Hulk squishes a head of a Chitauri in his hand, we all laugh. We don't have any sense of, that's somebody,
They're Gallagher way.
Yeah, they just kill them. There's no.
I mean, they make reference to Gallagher in the film. Why not? It's like, I mean, but the thing is, I wonder how much of it is a reflection and how much of it feeds back. I would say that, if Frank Miller's stuff was more popular than it was, but it's actually not. I mean, his ideas are, but only the surface stuff, like the fight between Batman and Superman, but it's completely recontextualized in the Batman versus Superman film.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it all the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of irrelevant. And 300 was popular a long, long, long time ago, and then the sequel tanked. Everything else Frank Miller's done has tanked. Sin City is not political, at least not in any way that refers to the real world. I mean, yes, the city is generally corrupt, but that's more of a story thing, not a political thing. It's not it's not a comment
City is
on
more. Sin City is more the fact that society is inherently sick. We should just burn it all to the ground. It's what if Travis Bickle wrote a political tract? That's Sin City.
Right, and we take that as a given, and then we move on from there.
Yeah.
It's noir on crack.
Yeah.
Literally noir on crack.
Cheap, nasty crack.
Exactly. Right. Right. Precisely. But the point is that the world is dark and corrupt. That's already there. That's not going to be questioned. That's the whole point of the story.
Yeah.
It's like we're not going to say why are there White Walkers. We just accept that there are. And that's just the kind of story this is. And that's actually, it's funny. I was just rewatching a little bit of Game of Thrones, and particularly the Revenge of Cersei at the end of last season, and thinking about about Trump's victory and how it felt an awful lot like that.
Oh God!
Awful lot like that.
Yes, these zombie children running around stabbing people, and I was going, oh, okay, I see what you're doing now. Yeah, all right. These drones.
I mean, Dear God, I mean, at least tonally, it feels like a prediction. It feels like this is how things are going to feel. It's weird. But the thing is, that things just get darker and darker, and we accept that on the show because that is actually a reflection of how things are. Good people are ineffective, and bad people become ascendant because we just accept that they should.
Speaking of that. One book in particular that I saw being referred to a lot in the wake of the result, and I think both you and I had it on our respective lists, was Warren Ellis and Derek Robertson's Transmetropolitan. And if we ever wanted a real-world version of the Beast, and with a smidge of the Smiler in there as well, although I'd argue Mike Pence is maybe the Smiler, I think we're in Transmetropolitan now.
Can you tell me?
Yeah.
What the Beast did exactly that made him so beastly? I've forgotten if it was ever explicit. I don't recall. What was it that made him the Beast exactly?
I think that Well, the Beast was just a law and order president who would willingly give the order for violent put-downs of any sort of social uprising or any sort of unrest. He was also mostly typified for being completely and utterly corrupt, even to his own personal health. He was just a drug-addled, drunk, sexual pervert. He was the Beast. Everything about him was just messed up.
But just the same. What we're talking about basically here sounds like if Chris Christie were president.
Yeah, in effect, and that's what I say.
Not quite the vision of Nixon.
Yeah, and where we have with the Smiler is somebody who just wants power and will screw over anyone and kill anyone to get that power and to stay in power. And that's where he's more dangerous than the Beast. Whereas the Beast was, oh my God, this guy's a monster, let's get him out of office, and then they elect somebody else, and oh my God, he is 10 times worse. The Smiler
it's like the Beast's monstrosity is limited.
Yes.
To what will protect him.
He is the Beast. He is horrible. We can see him.
The Smiler will come up with ways to hurt people just because he's got to have something to do.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is that over the past decade or so, people have kept trying to find points of reference in their national politics with Transmetropolitan. So Blair, during the Gulf War, the second Gulf War...
Very difficult, actually.
Yeah. Blair was largely assumed to be the Smiler. Everyone thought he was the Smiler. John Edwards, I want to say? The chap who had to drop out of the race because they discovered he was having an affair. A lot of people thought...
An affair on his wife who was dying of cancer and yet went out on the campaign trail to do a lot of hard work campaigning for him. Yes, that bastard.
Yes, him. A lot of people thought...
who I might add, before any of this broke, was actually the only person ever running for president I'd ever given a donation.
Oh,
so
no.
I hate him extra much.
Oh, no.
Extra much. That son of a bitch, I paid him $20 to fuck around on his very nice wife, by the way. She's a very nice woman. And like I said, she was actually dying, she knew it, of cancer, and yet went out on the road anyway to help make him president.
Yeah, and he was largely criticized, not only for the affair, but for taking his wife's cancer and turning that into political capital. And in Transmetropolitan, you have the scene where Smiler's wife and family are killed, and Spider says to his filthy assistants, she was nice, I liked her, I only met her one time. And the idea is, he was willing to kill his nearest and dearest just to hold on to power, just so we would sympathize with him, because the journalist, Spider, slightly embarrassed him in public. He will kill someone.
He reminds me of Bob Roberts, actually.
Yeah. Tim Robbins. Yeah. That sort of folksy character.
That sort of sociopathic lack of affect.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is that we had Blair, we had John Edwards, and then we had, in recent years, particularly on the left, we had a lot of people talking about Obama as the Smiler, because the idea was he's so pleasant, he's doing all these nice things, but meanwhile, he's got drone warfare in effect, he's involved in all this very dodgy surveillance operations, black ops operations that were inherited from the Bush regime, and he kept going. So there were a lot of people who looked at Obama and saw him as the Smiler, and that just shows you how
I don't see that as valid.
No, I know.
Because
the point I'm making
the other
is
president would have been doing the same thing as far as foreign policy, especially considering. And I'm not justifying anything here. I will point this out. I have a problem with drone warfare, but the reason I have a problem with drone warfare is because it's happening at all.
Yes.
Because we're even over there doing it.
Yep.
That being said, us being there and that being impossible, I would rather less people's lives were at risk in the doing of it. But at the same time, it makes it easier to do it. So that's the problem too.
Yeah.
The fact that there are no lives at risk means that they do a lot more of it.
Yep.
But at the same time, if it was another president, Democrat or Republican, that would be happening anyway. What needs to happen is that the whole thing needs to stop. But I don't really see the Smiler comparison with Obama making sense to anyone but Alex Jones.
This is the issue. This is the issue I'm saying. It's a misdirected analogy, and the Smiler became a sort of symbol for anyone who's disappointed with American politics, British politics. And they would just trot out Transmetropolitan again. And now we're in a era where we've just a president has been elected who is so straight out of the pages of Transmetropolitan. Trump looks and sounds and acts and says things that are you could attribute to the Beast or you could attribute to the Smiler. And my biggest fear is everyone's going, oh my God, it's Transmetropolitan. Where's our Spider? Where's our journalist who's actually taking these things on and getting popular attention for what he's saying, for his truth-telling? I don't think journalism exists in the way that Warren Ellis felt journalism could exist in the future. I feel as if journalism completely...
It's a very romantic view of journalism.
Yes, hugely romantic.
I mean, it is. And the thing, it's all dressed up in cynicism, but Spider is actually a very idealistic person if you actually read his writing apart from the complaint essays.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there's a difference between that and I took too many fucking drugs and nobody tolerates those. What's fucking wrong with you? I mean, there's that, but there's also like the whole thing about the person who is frozen and comes back, but there's no place for her.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story.
And there's no responsibility taken for her.
Yeah.
She's just okay. We brought you back. Goodbye.
Yeah.
But it's the thing is, and then of course, you know, there's the every year things get better thing, which, you know, I really appreciate Warren's faith in the future, but it rings increasingly hollow as years go by.
Yeah.
Every year we are not improving. Every year we are not getting further along that bridge. No. You know, although it is a beautiful fucking image.
Yeah.
I actually don't believe that that's really the case. Now, granted, you couldn't have anticipated the massive shock of last week. But actually what I would like to challenge Warren Ellis to do, if he happens to be listening, and if he is, sorry for the criticism, it's just a light one. I like the stuff overall. But I would like to see you go back to something that's been referred to a lot but never actually shown very much, which is, okay, Spider before he went up the mountain.
Yeah.
The whole thing with the Beast that led up to that. Flesh it out. Let's see the Beast. Let's see what the Beast was like apart from that moment in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Which is basically essentially taken straight from Fear and Loathing on the Champagne Trail of 72, by the way.
Yes.
It really is.
It's Hunter and Nixon talking about American football. It's that same sort of, this is absurd. Here's this dangerous individual, and we're going to talk about football.
I would like that a lot. I would like to see a lot more of the Beast. I would like to understand exactly this because I think it's pertinent now. And I know that Warren probably doesn't like doing that kind of direct topical comment. But I mean, being a futurist, he obviously thinks to how the work will look in the future. I can accept that. I'm just saying, if I had a wish list and it could be fulfilled, I'd love to see something like that. I mean, it certainly would be interesting to see Transmet come back. A lot of people have been making a lot of reference to idiocracy throughout this whole thing, but the thing is that Transmet actually goes in that direction, but much better than idiocracy does. Because the thing is that idiocracy simply says, oh, this is the future, it's going to be very trashy. Everything's going to look like the show Cops, basically.
Yeah.
And it's all going to be idiotic. Whereas Warren goes, well, the thing is, people live in things like that. You know, when they live in situations that may look ridiculous to us, they live in that. So there's this vague Cronenberg kind of acceptance of these bizarre, sometimes extremely trashy changes in society, where society becomes much more pornographic, much more drug-riddled, much more vice-ridden in the way we'd see it. and there's not even like there is an American flag this sense of there was anything before. It's more like, no, there was nothing before. There is nothing to remember. There is no nostalgia for the past. It's almost like the past didn't even exist. I mean, there's the Republican reservation, which you never see, I don't think.
Well, I mean, Spider lived up in the mountain, and we have these scenes of him traveling from the mountain down to the city. And you've got the lush countryside, and you've got everything looks pristine, and it seems there's no suburban sprawl as such. It's the mega city.
No, it's not at all like a post-apocalyptic landscape. It's just the city that's so everything's hyper-crowded in it.
And I think the reason for that is Warren sort of alludes to it in the scripts, where you had the superstorms and you had these periods of environmental disaster. So society moved into solely urban environments that they could control and control the weather, and so everyone exists within the city, and it's just constant noise and constant information and no natural connection whatsoever. Everyone's just trapped in this bubble, to the point where people are willingly swapping their genome with an alien species just so they can feel something. And so he's talking about a future world where our sense of what it is to be human is completely disconnected to the natural world. But on the plus side, at least the environment is there, and at least deforestation has stopped, and the rest of the world is carrying on fine. Humanity has basically ghettoized itself into cities, super cities, but still cities, and left the rest of the world alone, pretty much.
Or there's like the peculiarly 80s take on that in American Flagg, where these cities are malls.
Yeah. Either way, I think Flagg is an influence. I think 2008D is Judge Dredd in particular is an influence on Transmet. But it does seem to be a post-disaster world.
I think that American Flagg was basically American Judge Dredd, wasn't it? I mean, it was basically taking a lot of the appeal of Judge Dredd and some of the basic framework, and then just basically doing an American version, which is funny because Judge Dredd is supposed to be American anyway.
But Judge Dredd is principally about violence and suppression of choice, whereas in American Flagg you've got all that wonderful Chaykin stuff with the information, the constant noise, the constant use of television, and Transmed has that as well, because Spider is constantly communicating with somebody. He's constantly monitoring feeds. Everybody is fixed to their televisions. Everyone is fixed to the news sites. And again, you've got this valuation of journalism in Transmet and information that I think...
Information is bacterial.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what we're looking at now. Because what was scary about the election was you had all of these newspapers coming out for Clinton. You had all of these newspapers revealing all this quite detailed information on the things and forensic on the things that Trump was getting up to, and it didn't matter a damn, because you had these little enclaves of rightist voters who had their Reddit groups and had their private groups and their private websites and their Alex Jones and whoever else, and they don't need mainstream media anymore. Even mainstream media is an insult. So we're moving.
Actually,
yeah.
Actually, the truth is a little bit more depressing than that.
Oh, good.
See, the thing is, what it came down. No, they were seeing the same media sources the rest of us were. The thing is that these things made him more appealing.
Right. Yes. Okay. There's a notion.
That's what's increasing. That's what's increasingly being reported, is that these are the things they want him for.
Yeah, he gets away with it.
It's like he's a release. I mean, what is the scariest thing about this whole thing over here, and I feel lucky at least to be in California, which, is a pretty heavily, the whole West Coast is pretty heavily blue, so we're cushioned for a while until they start really trying to make certain things national, which is going to happen. It's going to be President Pence, not President Trump, one way or another.
Yep.
Whether de facto or de jure, one way or another, we're going to have President Pence.
That's what we all suspect, yeah.
And the thing is, what's scariest about this is that a certain reptile brain thing has been incanted into life here and given permission and license, and is being allowed to continue to do so is not being. You don't have some moment with like we do with George Bush, at least saying we are not at war with Islam. At least saying those words. We don't see Trump coming out and saying, I do not stand for racism, do not commit acts of violence in my name. Something anyone else would do. He hasn't done that at all, and it's happening all over the place. And these people are all naming Trump as they do so.
Yeah.
In one way or another, either written or spoken.
Yep.
And, his name's all over it, all over the place. He's branded there.
Yep.
And that really is kind of how it is. It's like a brand.
It's a brand of hate as well. It's equivalent to the swastika. It's equivalent to Hitler.
It is. His name is now a swastika, basically. And whether he means that to be the case or not, he's allowing it to happen, and he's not saying anything about it. And there's nothing remotely presidential about anything he's been doing. And he's probably not even going to be bothering with much control. And it doesn't matter anyway, because all they need now is his signing hand.
Yeah.
So, and yet all this stuff has been lit. And the thing about that is that when that particular reptile brain is lit up red like that, it doesn't go out until a lot of people die, usually. It's something that has a life of its own. And I wonder, is there something that's in comics that is an allegory for that? That is a story that makes reference to something of that nature, or is it just zombie stories, really?
I don't know. Are
we living in a zombie story now? I think we are. Apparently, these people. See, the thing is, I don't know what it's like over there, but over here, it's feeling like these people were all around us all the time, and now they're just making themselves known.
Yes. Yeah, and recent years you've had more and more stories where that notion of people around you suddenly becoming violent and aggressive through a virus of some kind or some sort of supernatural cause. I guess we're a couple of steps away from Cross. There you go.
It actually is very much like Cross, and I hate Cross, so that really sucks.
I will defend certain runs on Cross because I actually think they are.
Will you now? Which ones?
I will defend the original Garth Ennis. I will defend the Cy Spurrier run, which you were here, and I will defend the Alan Moore run, Crossed 100. I haven't
read those.
Having a lot of punch to them, and a lot of despairing passion for the violence people do, the violence people have done, that we are willing to look the other way on. And I think that's what makes them important. I do think a lot of stories in Cross don't work. I do think a lot of stories in Cross are just violent porn. I get it. I just think every now and then you need a work which is almost Rabelaisian, that sort of excess of sense data, which is really upsetting to read, but then it actually causes you to think and go, okay, what am I reading? What is this about?
Well, that's the entire point of Garth Ennis. So
yeah, he's trying to challenge you. He's trying to throw it in your face and get you to think about it. And I think that is something.
But it's at the same time, I don't know. Maybe I'm just sort of put off by the Avatar style, but I also resent the fact these are basically rape zombie comics. They're allowed on certain venues that I use for my publishing, but my stuff isn't.
Yeah, because they've got the.
And it's not. And my stuff is not violent.
Yeah.
So nor does my stuff include any rape.
Yeah.
So it includes sex, but yet that's not okay. But that is. And that bothers me.
Yeah.
But I think I've gone on about that elsewhere a long time ago. And that's political too. And actually, something that worries me about this new age we're going into, given certain things about Trump and his first lady, I wonder if this means there's going to be less censorship of certain things or more.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are saying that, again, if we want to talk about Transmetropolitan in this space, but journalism could be one of the first victims of a regime that targets any criticism.
They'll give in before they're even asked.
Yeah.
CNN's already adjusted.
Yeah.
They're already normalizing Trump.
And again, in relation to American comics, with the sort of commercial weight of the kind of stories you can tell, the kind of stories that you're sort of silently encouraged not to tell, I think that you will see the same effect on journalism, which we've already seen. I mean, that sort of cooling of journalistic fervor has already been in effect. I think one of the tragedies of Transmetropolitan for me is that it still believes in the ghost of Watergate. Like, it still believes in the myth.
Very much so.
Yeah, Woodward and
Very
Bernstein actually saved America, right? Whereas if you actually read the book that they wrote, I mean, they talk about how they broke the story, but then the story suddenly left them behind, and then all these other newspapers took it up, and what you actually had was the normalizing of the Watergate affair. And
what they were in fact the tools of an internecine war between the FBI and Nixon.
Yeah.
Because of Mark Felt.
Yes, and again, that has been sort of dusted off after his death and consigned to history as oh, isn't that nice, here's who it was. But the actual context of it, well, why was an agent doing this? Beyond crisis of conscience, could there have been something else at work here? Was not discussed. And I think that's where we were talking about Warren Ellis being a romantic. He's a disappointed romantic, but he's still a romantic, and we need the cold, hard logic of a Moore or an Ennis or even my friends from Prez. I'm just going to look at the name again, sorry. Or John Wagner, Pat Mills, Mark Russell, who did Prez. Somebody who looks at what's happening and goes, right. Oh, do you know who's another example? Bitch Planet. Bitch Planet. Bitch Planet, the comic book Bitch Planet.
Bitch Planet. I haven't read that.
It's it's a great comic book, but again, I've
heard of it.
That is a very cold, hard look at what's going on in the world and going, all right, well, this is just infuriating. This is something we should all be angry about. There's no attempt to make it look as if, oh well, we can rescue this. It's no, this is wrong.
For those of us who haven't read Bitch Planet, what is the basic premise of it? It's
set in the future. It's a sort of prison for women in space who are considered non-compliant. It's a patriarchal culture which is almost religiously patriarchal. The role of the man is supreme. And we have a cast of characters who are mostly colored, either African-American, Asian, and you have a character in the first issue who's introduced as your would-be white woman point of view on what it's like to be in this prison, the sort of orange is the new black type setup. And then within the space of the first issue, let's just say her role is concluded in the story, and it's a very sort of confronting the assumptions around what women can or cannot be. And I think it's an excellent comic in that respect. And what's amazing about it is each issue has an essay on feminism in the back of the issue. So it's creating a conversation about these things, really getting back to that notion of comics as a polemic tool. So yeah, it's a great book and worth mentioning in this context as a political book.
And who does it?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask. One sec.
Isn't it Kelly Sue McConaughey?
Yes, thank you very much. I am so sorry.
It is, okay.
I'm so sorry.
That was really just a guess, but okay.
Yeah, you hit it on the money there. Yeah, Kelly Sue DeConnick, and again, she is somebody who's been very vocal in how she's trying to tell stories that perhaps she wouldn't have been able to tell. And this is actually trying to, as I said, it's a piece of polemic. It's a piece of radical literature disguised as a comic book, and I think it's just come back for a new run. It's adopting the seasonal mode, so it's coming back for a new run, and the artist on the latest run is Valentine Delandro. So again, you've got this notion of it's a comic about women by women, which, if you look at American comics, how many of them are there? How many comics with woman protagonist are actually written by women? So It's interesting for all those reasons.
Well, certainly not as many as there should be in the mainstream world, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would recommend that, and certainly recommend it for folks looking for something to read in the wake of Trump, which has largely been seen as an attack on women.
Very much is, and I mean, what we're seeing is basically the textbook word for it is reaction. That's what it is. It's reaction as in reactionary. That's what this is, reactionary movement. And it's going to have an effect on the rest of the world because, first of all, I mean, there's only one left, and that would be Marine Le Pen.
Yeah.
As far as the Security Council countries.
Yeah.
And then we would the example of Trump is going to basically make that more thinkable and more possible.
Yeah. There's a chap here in Australia. His name is Bernardi, and he is heavily involved in that wing of Australian politics, which is all about Christian values, family values, anti-abortion, anti-gay rights, gay marriage. School children shouldn't be taught not to abuse and beat up gay kids. You know, for some reason they should. You know, that teaching these things is horrible. And he's been posing for photos with "Make Australia Great Again" on a hat.
Was this something that Murdoch incanted into life in Australia before he went to Britain, or was it something he just simply took advantage of in Australia?
No, the tragedy of Australia and Australian media is that Rupert Murdoch went overseas and had an easier time of defeating unions and defeating the media-based trade unions and knocking out his competitors with his sort of mock journalism. He took over the UK, took over the States, then came back to Australia and reseeded everything he'd done elsewhere. There actually was a culture of sort of a fair go and these Australian values of mateship, have a fair go, everyone gets to have their say, everyone, you don't doff your hat, you actually stand up for yourself, and that's been slowly but surely eroded since Murdoch has risen, and I think a lot of that is due to him, a lot of that is due to his influence on the political stage, not just here in Australia but in the world, but he actually came back to Australia having won over the UK and the States, and largely that was due to the support of people like Margaret Thatcher and the political right overseas. So yeah, he's very much the arbiter of this current tragedy in many ways. Anyway, I think we've really plumbed the depths today. I think it's really
I think so.
really leave everyone with a smile. Thanks for everything you've all the books you mentioned as well. I mean, these are all books I think are important for people to read, to inspire and get you mad and maybe give you some comfort that you're not alone, that other people feel the same way, and that.
And if you can find it, another good suggestion around this time will be the old Fantagraphics collection of World War III Illustrated, which I guess you could probably easily find on Amazon.
Yes. No, that was.
I got one very cheap, so you know.
Good work. And the other one I was going to mention was Ex Machina by Brian K. Vaughan and Tony Harris, but I mean that is really a book about how the political system will chew you up and spit you out. But it's worth a read. A lot of people don't like the last issue of that book because it really is a tragedy. But I found it very powerful. I think it's a very, very strong series. And I'm not usually a fan of Brian K. Vaughan, but I thought this one was very, very powerful book by him. John, where can people find you? Where can people find your work?
Well, they can find my work either at jlrobertson.org, or you can go to Amazon and you could pick up a number of things. This Sickness number 8 is the most recent. Then there's the first book of Lulu, which is my ongoing adaptation of the Frank Wedekind plays, and both of those are also available at Comixology and Google Play Books, and pretty much there. So go there and buy those things. And the Sickness number 8 also has a number of other creators, including the painter Emily Kaplan and Krista Wilde and Charles Alverson and Chad Parenteau, and it's really packed and it has color and it's good. So pick it up.
Excellent stuff. And as for myself, I recently had a story come out through Panalalia on David Crane's.
Never heard of that. What is that?
David Crane, he got a number of comic creators to submit strips for the Lakes Festival, the recent Lakes Festival, and he works with Electric Comics a lot, which is the Leo Moore digital comics reader. And so he asked people to submit. I submitted a story based on what happened in my grandfather's pub in the 1950s. It involves the Irish Civil War and Coca-Cola. So there you go.
That sounds neat.
Yeah, and it's a story called Syrup and Sawdust. It was just a short 2-pager. And Dan Gilmore, who's an artist based in Brisbane, he did the art for it. But yeah, it's based on a story from my family. And you can read it for free on the Electric Comics app. So that's Panalalia. And I also have a story that's just come out in Shane W. Smith's All the King's Men. So Shane is a Australian comic creator. He does his own space opera epic. All these stories are set within his universe. And he again invited writers to pitch him scripts. I wrote a story for him which is sort of a Randian science fiction story, sort of Ayn Rand in space. Atlas Shrugged in space, I describe it as. And yeah, that's been kickstarted for a print release. So you can find that on Kickstarter, All the President's Men, Shane W. Smith. Great stuff. Well, thanks for talking to me, man. Always appreciate it.
Well, thanks for talking as well.
Let's try and get through the next 4 years.
Well, that's a dicey proposition, but I'm sure it'll work.
Cheers for listening, folks. Thanks.
Thanks to Emmet and John for stepping in this week. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look us up on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Bat Poles, Paul and I discussed The Puzzler, a villain who was created to make use of an existing Riddler script when Frank Gorshin refused to come back. How does the original Riddler version compare to the finished product? Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. I think we've got a show coming up this Thursday. Let's see what happens. Next week on this show, Kumar and Dana will be here to talk about Charles Burns' Black Hole. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.